Okay, it's 11:05. Thank you all very much for dialing in on a Saturday morning and taking time out of your weekend. My name's Richard Lowe, and for those of you who've not met me before, I'm the founder and the CEO of Turn-Keyinvestments, which is a real estate investment company. I've been based here in Singapore, where I'm calling from, for 31 years. So I spent more than half my life in Singapore. And I'm originally, as you can probably tell from my accent, from England, from Oxford. Today, you're in the right place if you intended to come along and listen to the purpose-driven property investing. Now, I'm delighted to share that our co-host today is Barry Irvin, who is the Director of Art Care and Developments, which is the development company that we'll be working with on this investment opportunity that we'll be going through in just a moment. So, Barry, can I just introduce yourself? And if you could just say a few words to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Hi, guys. My name's Barry Irvin. I'm the Director of ARC Development. I've been involved in property for the last 25 years, both in the UK and international. The last 10 years focused on social housing, especially the regulated arm of social housing, CQC. I'm partnered with Richard to basically show you our product that we're going to be rolling out. So thanks, Richard.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Barry. So what exactly is purpose-driven property investing? Well, basically, it's combining what is a compelling investment with an opportunity that has meaningful impact and improves the quality of lives, typically in this case of very vulnerable people. So I'm very passionate about this because I do believe it is both a compelling investment, but goes beyond just the bottom line to helping some of the most needy in society. So today, we're going to be sharing in more detail about what we call a care-led real estate platform. This is combining a development company that is building adult care homes, but also a operating company that provides the care provision to those care homes. So both of them will be working hand in hand. Now, I'd like to start off with giving a bit more of a broad overview to social housing and the UK system, because it is very broad. We will be zooming in and focusing in on a particular sector of social housing, specializing in the adult and elderly care homes for the vulnerable. But let me just start with the next few slides for those of you who are not familiar. In fact, before I even go into this, it's also a way to check where the chat box is. If you would be kind enough just to find the chat box, it should look like a rectangle with a few lines inside, and just put a Y for yes if you are somewhat familiar with social housing, and put a no if you've never heard or you're not familiar with social housing in the UK. Now, I've done a lot of webinars over the years on this subject, and in general, I found that people in Asia are unfamiliar with social housing and this sector and how it works. So don't be shy if you don't know. In fact, generally, I find the majority of people don't know. But if you could just put a yes or a Y for yes and an N for no in the chat box, it just gives me a bit more of an overview to who the attendees are today and how many of you are familiar with this asset class. So also, when we come to the Q&A at the end, you'll know where the chat box is to put your questions as well. Okay, let me start off with giving a high-level overview to some of the social and macro context to the UK system. So the UK, like many European and Western countries, is what we refer to as a welfare state. Now, a welfare state typically charges their residents higher taxes, but then uses those taxes for providing social services. In this case, if you live in the UK, you can have access to free healthcare, free education, and for those people who qualify, even free housing. Now, there are certain acts or laws and legislation that have been enacted that backs up some of the care provision, particularly when it comes to housing. So in 2014, the Care Act was launched, and this sets out the statutory duty of local authorities, which are the equivalent of, like in Singapore, the town councils. So it's like a local government, to provide access to and fund care and support for vulnerable people in England. And then in 2017, something called the Homelessness Reduction Act, whereby if you lose your property, that is, if you can no longer afford to rent it, maybe you've lost your job, or unfortunately you can't service your mortgage and your property gets repossessed, the law means that within 57 days, the local council or authority or local government must secure accommodation for you. Now, if you are not what we call an urgent case, that will often mean going into temporary accommodation until more permanent accommodation can be found for you. Now, social housing isn't something that's just cropped up in the last 5 or 10 years. It actually came out of really the result of the Second World War. During the Second World War, many of the cities in the UK got heavily bombed, and there were a lot of homeless people. And so out of the Second World War, the social housing schemes were started, and the government provided a lot of affordable housing that could be built quickly to effectively give shelter and homes to many people who had lost their homes during the Second World War. Here are a few statistics that I think bring to home some of the challenges that face the UK when it comes to social housing. So it's estimated that an additional 90,000 homes needed to be built each year in order to try and catch up the deficit. One of the strange and challenging things as well is that there's an estimated 261,000 empty or abandoned homes, which, although wouldn't supply the total need, it would certainly make a fairly big dent. And there lies an opportunity: 261,000 empty or abandoned homes and 90,000 per annum needed. So one of the strategies that we look at is finding some of these empty and abandoned homes and then repurposing them into an elderly care home. 140,000 people in 2024 became homeless in just that 1 year. And it's estimated at the moment there's 1.3 million households that are on the wait list for some form of social housing and affordable housing. This is estimated to increase to 2 million by 2040. So unfortunately, the projections mean that the situation is going to get far worse before it gets better. Now, 1.7 billion was spent on rent for short-term accommodation. Now, the short-term accommodation is very often placing people in hotels or serviced apartments whilst waiting for something more permanent. I have videos where I've seen families that have been staying in some form of hotel accommodation for up to 5 years before they've been able to access a purpose-built apartment or house. 25 billion is spent on rent for social and affordable housing annually. So these are some very significant numbers, and again, just show some of the challenges that are faced in the UK with an extreme shortage of various forms of social housing. Now, in 2021, it was estimated that the social housing sector was valued at over £101 billion. Now, this has seen more and more institutional investors, such as insurance firms, pension funds, private equity, REITs, and even sovereign wealth funds, looking to acquire this asset class. And they do so because of the low risk, high yielding, government funded, long-term income that they're buying into. On top of that, in certain sectors of social housing, it has a very robust regulatory framework, so it gives that peace of mind as well. And of course, many institutions and companies now are looking at ESG angles. So it's not just about bottom line returns, but also the social impact it has on society. So what is CQC supported living investments in adult and senior care homes? Let me just read this definition here. A public and private property asset class. The investor owns the freehold property and leases it to a regulated, registered social housing operator. This could be a housing association or a care provider funded by the government or the National Health Service, or NHS for short. The operator takes full responsibility for the property management, repairs, utilities, void periods, and provides holistic support to vulnerable adults or residents. It could be children. There are special care homes that cater for children as well. So let's just sort of break down some of this. What is a housing association? A housing association is typically an organization that has been appointed by a local government or authority to provide housing of some form to approved profiles of people. They basically will rent the property, maintain the property, and just make sure that the people that are living there have a safe environment in which to live in. When we talk about a care provider does pretty much everything that housing association does, but they provide healthcare support as well. It might be part-time, somebody coming in for a few hours a week. It could go to the other extreme, which is full-time 24-hour care provision. These are for people that need round-the-clock care. So this hopefully gives a little bit more of an idea of what a housing association or a care provider provides. And to break it down really into three parts, we've got, first of all, an investor. That is maybe people like yourself who are considering or investing your own care home. You own a freehold property and you'll receive a long-term rent, which is ultimately funded by the UK government, excuse me, or the National Health Service. The tenant, in this case, is a care provider, particularly in the sector that we're in, which is the adult and elderly care homes. They lease the property, they provide the care provision and the care providers, and they manage the property on your behalf. And the end recipients are the vulnerable residents. And again, in the sector that we're in, these are typically adults and seniors with various forms of mental and physical disabilities. So how does funding and rental ultimately get to an investor? So it starts with the government, which allocates a budget to the local authorities or town councils or the National Health Service. The local authorities and National Health Service identify and qualify the vulnerable recipients who can benefit from the funding and live in the care homes. The housing associations, but more particularly in our case, the care provider, contracts with those local governments or National Health Service to provide both the housing and the care provision to the vulnerable adults. And you as a landlord will receive a rental agreement over a 25-year period and receive 100% of the rent that's due to you. So the 6 pillars, as we refer to them, of why this becomes a compelling investment are as follows. So as mentioned, you receive 100% of the rent, which is ultimately government underwritten, paid on a monthly basis to your bank account. The leases or the tenancy agreements are what we call 25-year full repair and insurance commercial leases. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail and the benefits of that compared with a lease to a normal family on the next slide. Now, if you were to invest in one of these properties, they will come brand newly renovated, built specifically for the occupants under the CQC guidelines and requirements. With these leases, there are no void periods, there are no repairs and maintenance, there's no management fees or service charges. And the rental agreement is tied to inflation. So every year, your rental will go up aligned with what the previous year's inflation rate was. And you can sell these properties at any time, there's no restriction. But if you'd like, you can participate in a buyback. It's optional. And we would buy this property back at a 10% uplift from the original purchase price that you had purchased the property at. Now, Barry, I forgot to ask you to come in on the previous slide back here and just explain a little bit more about what CQC regulation is and why this is important to understand when considering investing into social housing.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. Yes, CQC is the highest form of regulation for social housing. They basically monitor the house, any reporting that gets done per month. For example, if there was an incident with one of the residents, a report has to be submitted to CQC. Financial reporting as well. They make sure that the operation is financially sound, that the accounts are done every year to a satisfactory standard. So it's not just support and regulation of the tenants, it's the overarching umbrella of the whole operation, which includes their staff, their operations, financial competency, the whole spectrum. And they are the highest regulated form you can get in social housing. And they are in from the very beginning, from the very day that we purchase a property, even to the specifications that we do the refurb to. We have to do it to specific CQC regulated standards, depending on who's going to go into each property. For example, if it was a blind person, if it was someone with severe disabilities, the refurbishment and the quality will be reflected bespoke to that individual's needs.
Great. Okay, so I mean, the regulator, the CQC, which stands for Care Quality Commission, is basically regulating and monitoring the care providers to ensure that they are providing the kind of service to the occupants and maintaining quality of care, as well as looking at their financial accounts each year to make sure that, again, they are in good financial standing, which is very good for you as an investor because it means that there is a third-party regulator monitoring the tenant, which in this case would be the care provider. Okay, let's move on. So this is a very interesting comparison between renting a property to an individual or a family in what we call the private rental market. I'm going to refer to that as a traditional buy-to-let tenancy agreement. And side by side, we can see the difference when renting the property to a care provider, and we're calling this a supported living agreement. So when we look at the rent source for buy-to-let is usually an individual or a family. The rent source for supported living ultimately is funded by the government or the National Health Service. The contract length, now earlier this year, the UK has brought in what we call the Renters' Rights Bill, and that means that there are no longer fixed-term contracts of 1 to 2 year tenancy agreements. They are now monthly rolling tenancy agreements. With supported living, we apply a 25-year commercial FRI. That's a full repair and insurance lease. So you have a long-term contract. Void periods. Effectively, the investor or the landlord would have to absorb the cost. So if you have a void period and you are paying service charges and a mortgage, then ultimately, if you don't have a tenant, you've got no income, but you still have to bear those costs. With a supported living, There are no void periods. If any of the rooms are not taken within a care home, then ultimately that's up to the care provider. But in this asset class, there is such a huge undersupply that when a room becomes vacant, then it's almost filled within the next day or two. Repairs and maintenance. Well, an investor or the landlord would have to pay in a traditional buy-to-let, whereas with supported living, it's the care provider or operator that pays for the repairs and maintenance. The rent uplift, that would be for a buy-to-let, the market rate, which hopefully is going upwards, but you never know. It could be that in certain countries, an oversupply occurs and rent could even go down. In supported living, as I touched on before, your rent is increased each year based on the previous year's CPI or consumer price index, which is one of the main indexes for inflation, which gives you the peace of mind that irrespective of whether the open market is going up or down, your rental will continue to move upwards. Tenant management. This is usually done, especially if it's overseas, by a property management agent. I know in Singapore, being a small country, it's not uncommon that the landlord is also sort of managing the property as well. In supported living, you have a regulated care provider. Now, social impact, with a buy-to-let, it may be non-specific. It may not necessarily have a social impact. However, with supported living, it has a massive social impact because the profile of people in the care homes that we are working with are, as I mentioned, typically physically or mentally handicapped. And it does allow them to effectively live in a smaller home with more dignity and very often closer to their family as well. So what is some of the rationales and reasons for investing into this asset class? Well, as I just touched on, it has a profound social impact by radically improving the quality of vulnerable, mentally and physically disabled adults and senior citizens. It is a sector that is massively undersupplied by good quality regulated care providers. And with an aging population, especially as we see the baby boomers reaching their golden years, it does have huge long-term growth potential. In addition, providing more quality care homes will alleviate some of the bed pressure on hospitals and allow people to live more dignified lives in the community rather than living long-term in hospitals and mental health institutions. And as mentioned, this sector is highly regulated by the Care Quality Commission, or CQC. So you have peace of mind as an investor that this sector is well overseen. And we will be working with our exclusive care provider. They're called Ashurst Residential Care, who've actually been operating 19 to 20 years in this sector. So we can see that in this sector, there is a huge undersupply and a major size of the population coming into their golden years, which creates a huge market and at the same time, a huge opportunity. Now, the bottom paragraph states the UK is chronically undersupplied for good quality adult supported living accommodation, combined with an aging population and statutory duties on councils, creates a structural long duration demand pipeline that is virtually unaffected by economic cycles. So another benefit to investing into this asset class is that unlike maybe traditional buy-to-let properties that could have an impact if the economy turns down, maybe there are less tenants around, maybe the rental drops, maybe the property price even drops. Whereas with this sector, it is very much unaffected by economic cycles. There is, as I say, a structural undersupply, we've got an aging population. The properties are rented for 25-year leases, and the rent is adjusted upwards each year based on inflation. In fact, one could argue to say is that if the economy goes down, there is a greater need for social housing. More people are losing jobs and would require social housing. So you could actually say that this is a very defensive asset class to have as part of an overall balanced investment portfolio. Okay, so basically what we are providing is an opportunity to invest into this asset class with a developer called ARC Care and Development. And as I say, we refer to this as a care-led real estate platform. And Barry, if I can just ask you to come in and maybe expand on what we mean by a care-led real estate platform.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. So every property that ARC sources is being specifically requested from a regulated operator. So a regulated operator is Ashurst Residential Care, as Richard said. They've been trading for 20 years in this sector, and they are set for expansion. So because there's such a demand for this type of care in the UK, Ashurst basically give us a criteria. So they'll say, okay, ARC, we're looking for a 5-bed HMO in this area for these specific needs. So we go and specifically find them the correct property. We submit the property to them. They do their analysis on it, and they give us a legal contract called an AFL form, which is Agreement for Lease. So they will actually give us a contract to take that property from us on a 25-year lease at a set starting rent before we even purchase it. So we don't leave anything to chance. We then purchase the property, do the renovation to Ashurst's CQC standards. Once that's complete, the lease is then executed. 25 years, as Richard said, no voids, no repairs, no management, CPI linked. And then we then take that product and we sell it to an end investor. So that's the full life cycle of the beginning until the end.
Great. Thanks, Barry. Before we move on to the next section, I'm just going to go back to this slide here, which is comparing the difference between renting in the private rental market as a buy-to-let or renting the property to a care provider under supported living. And now hopefully having a better understanding of the difference of a traditional buy-to-let and supported living, I'd like to just ask to answer this question. So knowing now that some of the differences between a traditional buy-to-let property investment and a supported living, would you be able to put in the chat box, for those of you who've more recently dialed in, it should be a little rectangle at the bottom right-hand corner. If you can just put in there, yes, this would be interesting. So just put a Y if now knowing the difference between a supported living and a buy-to-let would give some level of interest in this as an investment. You can just put a Y, and if it's not of interest, you're more than welcome to put an N for no. It also just makes sure you know where the chat box is, so when we have the Q&A coming up later, you know where to put your questions. Okay, the next slide is actually a short video clip from ITV. That's a TV production company in the UK. And the first 3 minutes is going to share with you a case study of an individual that desperately needs a care home and a level of provision and care, but unfortunately, because of the lack of funding, is still having to stay in a mental health hospital. And I think it really provides and brings home the desperate need for this kind of property across the UK.
TV News investigation can reveal the NHS in England is spending more than £500 million a year, keeping more than 2,000 people with learning disabilities and those who are autistic locked up in hospitals. We can also report almost half of those patients don't need to be in hospital at all. But a lack of funding to give them a life in the community means they remain locked up indefinitely. The government had promised to cut the numbers of those locked up in half by 1st of April this year, but we can now reveal that they will miss that target and they are 6 years behind schedule, as Peter Smith reports.
For 10 years now, Sarah's daughter has been kept locked up in hospital. We're choosing not to show her face or name her. It's not that Sarah's daughter has done anything wrong. She isn't serving any kind of sentence. She was born with a learning disability, and it's now a 2-hour drive for her elderly parents just to see her, and visitations are restricted.
She's being punished for being herself.
For having a disability?
For having disability.
When Sarah's daughter first went into hospital, it's because she needed help. Now, she can't get out. In fact, she was clinically cleared for release 2 years ago.
You're in hospital to get better. You're not in hospital to be kept. It can't be cured. She needs support in the right environment, and the hospital is not the right environment.
Our daughter just needs a suitable place to go and some carers to support her. Then she could live freely in the community, close to family. But our society is not providing that. Lack of funds, Sarah is told. So her daughter remains locked up indefinitely.
I don't know what goes on. I'm not known for 10 years what's actually going on behind those gates. If somewhere isn't found for her very, very soon, she's going to regress and remain in there for the rest of her life. God forbid.
The system that is keeping her unnecessarily
Yes.
is also breaking her.
Yes.
And that would mean a lifetime potential with no release date in this secure hospital.
And the financial costs behind that must be enormous.
We have now investigated the money being spent on this, and Sarah is right. There are more than 2,000 with learning disabilities and autistic people currently locked up in hospitals across England. From data ITV News has obtained, we can report it costs more than £500 million for just 1 year. The NHS pays for this, and on average, current patients are being kept locked up for almost 5 years. Following an NHS England review last year, we reported almost half don't need to be in hospital at all. Based on our freedom of information requests, that would mean £18 million a month is spent from the NHS budget, locking people up whose needs could be met in the community.
We have a huge waste of public money going on buying the wrong kind of care, institutionalizing people, placing them in a position where they're subject to restrictive practices like being over-medicated, kept in isolation, subject to physical restraint, where people are left damaged and traumatized.
Okay, I mean, it's a very sad case, but sounds like it is a case that is multiplied across many people. And again, this is where, as a sector, we feel that we can have a profound positive impact on these people's quality of lives. Now, we're going to move forward to the next part of the webinar, which is really sharing 3 different strategies of how you can enter into this asset class. The first one is probably the most familiar, is a traditional buy-to-let, as in buying the property and owning the brand newly renovated property, giving a starting net yield of 8%. The second strategy is what we call a co-develop or forward funding. I'll break this down in more detail as we go through the next few slides. And this offers a starting net yield projected at 10%, but could even be higher. And then strategy 3 is private financing, which is effectively lending money to the developer. And rather than owning the property, we provide a fixed term interest rate, which would be at 12% per annum, paid 1% per month. So we're going to break down these 3 strategies and first of all, go into more of a traditional buy-to-let strategy. So here we have an example of a live available property for purchase, which is coming brand newly renovated. This is a 4-bedroom compliant HMO, which would be managed by Ashurst as a small home under their care provision. The purchase price is 168,900, and at an 8% net yield, that equates to £13,512 per annum. As mentioned, the rent increases each year based on the CPI or inflation. Now, the 50-year inflation average rate is at 2.84% in the UK. So if we were to use 2.84% and use that to compound the rent from year 1 through to year 25, the rental at the end of year 25 would be equivalent to 27,300, which is a net yield of 17.1% and a total combined rent over the 25 years of £480,000. We mentioned that the lease type is 25 years, a full repair and insuring lease, and your rent would actually start from day 1 of completion. So once you've signed your sales and purchase agreement and completed on the property, the 25-year lease starts from then. The property is freehold. In fact, most of the properties that we have are freehold. And lastly, they can be bought through a company structure or SPV, a special purpose vehicle structure in most cases. Now, one of the big benefits of that is that when you buy a property through a company structure, the stamp duty is only at 0.5%. If you had bought this directly off a developer or off another person, and you're paying a traditional stamp duty, a property like this would probably attract, for a non-resident investment property, somewhere between 7 to 8% stamp duty. So right there alone, by structuring this through a company acquisition, you are saving massively on the stamp duty. Now, these are some of the internal pictures of the property, and as you can see, it's been done to a decent standard. It's not Buckingham Palace, but at the end of the day, these are built to CQC operational specifications. And I know you touched on this, Barry, but maybe you can just explain and highlight again the point at which the CQC care provider gets involved with the developer and what kind of specifications need to be adhered to depending on the end profile of the occupant.
Yeah, sure. So the CQC is involved from the very start. So what would happen is Ashurst, our operating company, they would give a full report on this property. They would let us know the exact criteria that we have to refurbish it to. For example, it might be for someone who's partially blind. So what we need is we need hand railings in every room, hand railings get up the stairs. If it was, for example, someone that needed severely disabled mentally and physically, then it would be an extremely high kit out. You're looking at panic buttons. Some have to have staff rooms. So even if it's a 4-bedroom, that might be 1 bedroom for the tenant, and the other 3 is for staff who would be on a rotational basis, because some of the occupants need whatever round the clock care, and some just need a daily visit. If it's an adult who's getting integrated back into the community after spending a long time in hospital, they might just need help with their shopping, a visit, making sure they're okay, and all of that is covered under the CQC umbrella of regulation.
So basically what you're saying is that the CQC operator, in this case Ashurst Residential Care, would be working with us, the developer, right from the outset to make sure, first of all, yes, this property is something that they would be interested to rent in. They have people and certain occupants that would be suitable for this, and then based on those occupants, the kind of renovation that would be done would be very much aligned with the occupants to ensure that it is a suitable accommodation for the needs of those people.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe just to re-emphasize that as a developer, you're not going to take on a new property until you've got the go-ahead and approval from the operator and the care provider. So it's not like the developer is finding a property and renovating it and then hoping that a care provider would rent it. It's actually already pre-approved up front. Is that correct, Barry?
Yeah, that's correct. We get an AFL contract, which is a legal document, which is a short for agreement for a lease. So they give us an AFL, agreement for a lease, stating that if we purchase this property and we do it to these set standards, they will give us a 25-year full repairing and insuring lease over that property on completion.
Excellent.
So nothing's left to chance. Nothing's.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this question quite often whereby a client says, look, I'm keen to invest in this, but how do I know that the care provider is going to take a 25-year lease agreement? Well, that will have already been agreed well before we've even started the conversation with a potential investor.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at another property. This is actually a 6-bedroom HMO. The price of this one is 259,350, which equates in year one for just over 20,700 pounds with a 8% starting net yield. As mentioned, the rent will increase based on inflation each year, which means by year 25, based on a 2.84% compounding increase, you would be receiving £41,354. Now, the total combined rent over the 25 years equates to £791,000, which actually would pay back the price of the property more than 3 times over. And that doesn't even include the capital growth or the price appreciation. And as we've mentioned before, it's a 25-year lease. The lease starts on day one of completion. It's a freehold property and can be bought through a company structure, saving huge amounts of stamp duty. And these are some of the internal photos as well. Now, again, if you were investing, the property will come fully furnished at no additional expense to you. So even though these photos show unfurnished, the properties will become fully furnished as part of the overall investment. So we've touched on the name of the care provider. It's called Ashurst Residential Care. They specialize in catering to old people, dementia, mental health conditions, physical disabilities, and visual and hearing impairment. Barry, could you go into a little bit more detail about exactly, what the regulator is doing, and in what areas do they regulate the care providers?
Yeah, sure. So CQC is the highest form of regulating in social housing. So they do annual inspections and they also do monthly reporting. So, for example, if there was any type of incident with any of the guests, if they were maybe injured or they became severely ill, a report has to be sent to CQC. They also monitor the operator's financial strength, because what they cannot have is they cannot have a regulated QCQ operator getting into difficulty, and the guests, the guests with severe mental health and physical disabilities maybe become displaced. So the regulation is extremely tight around the running of the operation, and that's everything from the staff checks, compliance, competency, monthly reporting, incident reports. It's the full umbrella. So it's a very hands-on regulatory reporting, not just like a yearly submission of a form. It's carried out monthly.
Thanks, Barry. And so Ashurst has been operating, as I say, 19 to 20 years now. On a regular basis, there are checks going on in terms of the care provision. And one of the reasons why we have been very happy to be the exclusive partners of Ashurst Residential Care is that they have a long track record of 19, 20 years, and they have consistently hit these good ratings in every area of their service provision, which is, again, very, very unusual. So we're very comfortable and confident that as a care provider and obviously as a tenant to the properties, that you've got a highly competent and quality care provider as your long-term tenant. All right, let's move to the second strategy, which is to co-develop or forward fund. Now, the benefit of this strategy is that you can potentially get higher returns, as in a higher ROI, and higher yields by forward funding a property development. Now, typically, we would be looking at a minimum of forward funding of £150,000, which in Sing dollars is about 258,000. The development company, that's Arc Care and Development, will source, acquire, renovate, and apply a 25-year FRI commercial lease with our CQC Ashurst Care Provider being the operating company. Now, the developer will charge the investor a 10% project management and asset enhancement fee. That's for all the time that we do to do all of what we provide as a value add. But in addition, it's not just doing this renovation and renting to the private rental market. With our relationship with the care provider and the National Health Service and local government, we are able to further enhance the value of the property by applying these long-term leases with regulated care providers. Now, once the property is completed, the investor will own the care home, and the projected net yields would be around about 10%, but potentially, depending on the price of buying and the renovation, could even get up to 11 and 12%. Plus, in addition to having a higher rental net starting yield, you will have actually increased the equity that you have, because effectively, instead of buying the end property, you are coming in and funding. You are taking development risk, of course, but the price to do a forward fund relative to buying the end renovated property is less. So you end up having a higher yield and an increased amount of equity in that property. And after a 6 to 12 month period of collecting your rent, the property would then be available for a commercial valuation, which is where you have the potential to pull out most of that initial £150,000, and depending on the loan to value and the valuation, possibly even pulling out all of your initial capital, which would allow you, if you wanted to use the same money and recycle it and reinvest and compound your returns. And this flow diagram here really summarizes this whole strategy, where if you come in and forward fund a property, we will, together with you, decide on a property to acquire. We will then renovate it, secure a long-term lease, stabilize the rental income, refinance it under a commercial loan. And through a commercial valuation and loan, we can typically get a higher valuation, which allows you to then pull out some, and in some cases, all of the initial equity, and then use it to refinance again. So in effect, one tranche of capital could potentially grow multiple properties, compounding your income and growth and accelerating the speed at which you can build a property portfolio. So an actual hypothetical example could work like this. The initial purchase price of a below market value property, let's say, is £100,000. The renovation cost is £36,000, and the 10% project management fee and asset enhancement fee is £14,000, coming to a total funding of £150,000. The valuation could easily be £200,000, And if we were to refinance at a 70% loan to value, which is a very realistic LTV, after a 6 to 12 months of rental income, then 70% of £200,000 would release 140,000 of equity, so pulling out most of your initial funding and leaving just £10,000 in the deal. So that £140,000 could be then utilised potentially for another investment, and you can see how we can use the same initial tranche of money and recycle to enable you to quickly build a very high yielding portfolio. So let's move to the third and final strategy, private financing. Now, this is very different because in this case, you are not ending up owning the property, you are lending money to us, the developer, and in return, receiving 1% per month, where we would pay the coupon every 6 months. Effectively, if you were to, at the end of the term, the maximum term, I should say, is 18 months, but because these properties can be renovated in 1-2 months if they're a smaller property, maybe 3 months if they're a larger one, after gaining the rental income, it's not unrealistic to be able to exit you within 6 to 12 months of getting the property either refinanced or possibly sold to an investor. So if you decide to reinvest your funds, then effectively what we will do is you will continue to get 1% per month on the amount invested, but we will provide an additional bonus where we'll give you 5% net rent of the previous property that you have funded. And if you were to keep recycling this, then again, you will continue to receive 1% per month on the property, on the money lent to you, and 5% net rent for every property that you have funded. So if after 3 years you have funded 3 properties, you would be getting 5% net rent for each of those properties that you have funded, so long as you continue to roll over your money, plus the interest on that principal as well. Now, in addition, investors have a first charge security registered at the UK Land Registry to give you peace of mind that you have security over the property, which is the same kind of security that a bank takes when offering a mortgage loan. So how does private financing work? So similar amount required, a minimum loan of £150,000 or the equivalent of 258,000 Singapore dollars. First of all, we need to onboard you as a client, which means processing the anti-money laundering and know your client checks. Then what we do is identify a property to fund, sign the loan agreement and transfer the funds. What we'll do once the funding has been put in place and we've acquired the properties, we'll give you regular updates of the property being renovated. And every 6 months, we would provide you with the coupon interest rate at a rate of 1% per month. Now, at the exit, you would redeem your capital plus any outstanding interest, or you can reinvest and go again. And as mentioned, if you were to reinvest and go again, you would be receiving 1% on the amount that you've invested, plus 5% net rent of the previous property or properties that you have funded. So that brings me to the end of the presentation today. What I'd like to do is just ask a question and get some feedback from you. We've shown you about the potential of investing into social housing, into a sector of social housing, which is the adult and elderly care sector. The adult elderly care sector not only is massively undersupplied with a huge aging population, but is one of the most highly regulated sectors of social housing, giving hopefully peace of mind to the investors. We've shown some of the differences about renting a property to a care provider, as opposed to renting in the private rental market, and the kind of returns that you can anticipate getting a low risk, high yielding, inflation hedged, long-term income generating asset, which is also appreciating over time. We've then shown at the end 3 different ways that you could invest in this strategy. I'm going to say strategy 1 is that buy to let. You are investing in the end renovated property, giving you an 8% net yield. Strategy 2 is the co-development and forward funding of the property. And this potentially gives you the higher returns, the yields starting at an estimated 10%, could even be as high as up to 12%, and also with a higher equity within that, allowing you to refinance and potentially unlocking most of that equity, possibly all of it, to recycle and go again. Or the third option, which is the private financing. So if you prefer not to own the asset, but receive an attractive return of 12% per annum, plus a 5% net of the rental income of a previous property, and a shorter term duration. So typically a maximum of 18 months, but very often will be exiting you somewhere between possibly 6 to 12 months. So a shorter term duration with an attractive return and security over that property by way of a first charge registered at the land registry. So before we go into the Q&A, I'd just like to get some kind of feedback from you. And again, if you can find the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner, and if at this point in time you could share with us whether you have a preference for a buy-to-let, and if so, put a number 1 in the chat box. If you have a preference for co-developing and forward funding, put a number 2. And if you prefer the private financing where you're lending the money to the developer, if you could put a number 3. So again, I'll just repeat that. 1 is to the strategy for the buy-to-let, 2 is for the co-developing, and 3 is for the private financing. So if you could just put that into the chat box, I'm just going to pause just for a moment, take a drink, and then what we'll do is start the Q&A. Okay, thank you. Some of you have already put in your preferred strategy. There's no right or wrong on this. It's just interesting to see which strategy people may be favoring. As I say, there's no right or wrong. All right, let's get started with some questions. And again, I really encourage people to ask a question. There's no such thing as a silly question. And the question that you may ask is a question that somebody else who's a bit too shy to ask. So please do fire away the questions, and Barry and myself will do our very best to answer. Okay, looks like CJ, we have a question. Richard, is this a take or pay arrangement? And since you mentioned there is no void period, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by take or pay. Basically, strategy 1, okay, you're referring to the void period. If you could expand on it, that would be helpful. But basically, as an investor, you own a physical property which has been rented to a care provider who ultimately get their funding from the UK government. Irrespective of whether all of the rooms in the care home are used, is almost irrelevant to you, the landlord, because the care provider will receive a budget from the government or the National Health Service, and that budget caters for 1, your rent, 2, the care provision, 3, the repair and maintenance, and 4, also a little bit of profit for them as well. Barry, I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that.
Yeah, Richard, that's absolutely correct. And I just seen just above that VA comment as well about can you describe the income as government funded? Who is legally obligated to pay the rent? So that is the operator. So as Richard quite rightly said there, it's not the rent that's just guaranteed. The government give a care package. So for example, on those two assets that we showed earlier, there will be a care package allocated to that asset for the next 25 years. So the care package might be £100,000 per year, and that covers the actual rent is a very small part of the care package. So the care package is for the full operation, is for the staff, is for the care-led demand. Everything is incorporated into the care package, and that is what is funded by the government. When it comes to paying the rent, it is the operator that is legally obliged to pay the rent because they have a 25-year contract on that property. So for the next 25 years, they are directly legally obligated to pay the rent on that asset.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks for expanding that. Okay. Irfan, good to see you and hear you again. It's been a little while. Is there an opportunity if I find local investors who are interested in strategies 1 and 2? Second part, which locations of the UK, i.e., can it be in London, Southeast, to be near the investor? Okay. Do you want to take that one, Barry?
Yep. The moment we are focusing on the north, east and the northwest. So we're not going to be in London anytime soon, just because at the moment we're working with Ashurst Residential Care, the operator, and they are based in Scarborough, North Yorkshire. So for the foreseeable future, that is the area that we are going to be operating in. But of course, you know, we're up for partnerships with investors. If anyone refers investors or wants to work with us in that type of form, we're open for partnerships as well.
Yeah, and I should say, for those of you not familiar with the UK, Scarborough is one of the most popular seaside towns in the north of England. It's a very popular place for retirees as well, which, dare I say, kind of feeds into our business model very well, because with the retirees often moving there to live at a point whereby they may need some kind of assisted living, then our care homes are ideal to help cater for their additional needs as they age. Okay, let's see if there's any more questions. Is the rental payment guaranteed, Barry?
So the rental payment is legally contracted. So the rental payment is legally contracted under a regulated CQC lease. So we wouldn't say guaranteed as an insurance certificate guaranteed, but it's legally contracted under a regulated CQC lease by an operator that's been trading for 20 years. It's just as good as.
Great. Lovely. Next question. Is the 25-year lease signed before ARC purchases the property?
Yes, that's correct. The AFL, agreement for lease, is a legal contract that we get signed from the operator before we purchase the asset. When we view the asset, we do a full report. We submit that to the operating company, and they will then give us a legal contract that they will take that property from us once we have purchased it and done the required renovations.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. I think we've actually answered this question. I'll just read it out again. It may have been because I overlooked it initially. So when you describe the income as government NHS funded, who is legally obliged to pay the rent? And is there any direct government or local authority guarantee? I think you've kind of answered that. I mean, what we've said is that there's a legally binding agreement ultimately it's the care provider that is paying you, the landlord, but the care provider has an agreement with the local authority or National Health Service, a budget that they've already pre-agreed for a 25-year agreement on that property, which is not just the rental, it's the care provision, the repair and maintenance, and their profits as well. I think we've answered that one, haven't we, Barry? I think. Yeah. Okay, we've got some more questions. Excellent. Sorry. In terms of returns, it's healthy, but of course, the overseas investor does not take currency. Sorry, the investor does take currency risk. Yes, Sujay, I think it would be fair to say that anytime you invest in an asset class that is outside of your base currency, there is currency risk. So yes is the answer. I should say that when you look at the exchange rate between the pound sterling and the Sing dollar, it's been stable, I would say, for the last 5, 6, 7 years. It's hovered round about 1.7 Singapore dollars to the pound. It did have a little wobble, or actually a big wobble for about a week with the Liz Truss mini budget that sort of blew things up. But yes, ultimately there is currency exposure risk. Sometimes what I have suggested to clients is that, let's say when you exit and the currency isn't necessarily in your favor to repatriate it into your base currency, let's say Sing dollars, the opportunity is that you could still reinvest into another pound sterling investment, or you could even keep it in a currency account in pound sterling so that you're not forced to repatriate it back into your base currency when the exchange rate is not in your favor. So you can always look at different strategies of how you can decide as and when to repatriate the currency. Okay, operator risk. If the operator loses its CQC registration, what contractual step-in arrangements protect continuity of rent and care provision? I think that's a very good question. Barry, can I ask you to take that one?
Yeah, so what would happen in that case is it's very, very unlikely that something like that happens overnight. What happens is, due to the monitoring, if there is some kind of concern about the running of the operation, the CQC will be doing almost monthly inspections, visits, trying to rectify any problems that they may have, whether that's staffing problems, financial problems. The CQC will be assisting with that. If the worst case happened and they lost CQC registration, another CQC operator would be put into that asset, and the CQC regulator assists with that, because the main concern with the regulation is not actually to protect the investor, it's to protect the vulnerable people within the building. And the knock-on effect of that is obviously it falls to the protection of the investor as well. So the most important thing is that these people do not get displaced and they do not have any gaps in their care. So yes, if worst case happened and it was CQC registration, a new operator would take over that building.
Great, thanks, Barry. Okay, Elaine, so do you have your latest report by Care Quality Commission? How often are care homes reviewed by the Commission? Okay, Barry, you go for that one, I think.
Yeah, sure. So the Care Commission is almost a monthly reporting operation. They're very, very hands-on with each asset. So what happens is it's not annual. If an operation was deemed to be falling below par, you know, say it was just like an average rating or even maybe a poor rating, they would be inspected every single year, and they would want to get those ratings up to good. Once your ratings are up to good, you might only get a physical inspection once every 2 years or once every 3 years. Because of the monthly how the monthly reporting works, e.g. if there's an issue, if there's a complaint by one of the residents. It's very, very hands-on in terms of the whole operation. So yes, yearly reporting, if your ratings are slipping, if you're constantly good, it might be once every 2 years you'll get a physical inspection.
And just could you repeat for people who may have come in late about how the regulator also reviews their accounts and how often they need to submit the accounts, because they don't want the operator or care provider going bust, because that would also cause problems.
Yes, each operator has to be financially competent. Their accounts are assessed by the CQC operator. If there was any irregularities, or if it was decline in financial state, again, the CQC would immediately get involved in that.
Thanks.
And right.
And there is a website, if somebody would like to have that, Elaine, we can provide you with a website that gives you a link directly to Ashurst Residential Care, and you can actually look at their ratings there. In fact, the slide that I had provided, which was, I think, July 2023, was the last time they had a physical inspection, which showed a good rating in every aspect. And again, you might ask, why is it that they're not being done a physical inspection every year? There are a lot of care homes, but at the end of the day, if your rating is good and there is no complaints, the physical inspections tend to be every 2 or 3 years, as opposed to if somebody's ratings are lower, the inspections are on a more regular basis.
Yeah.
Okay. As the property is refurbished to specific needs of the occupants, would there be situations where subsequent renovations are required to cater to other needs of future occupants? And if so, who pays for these? Barry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, that's correct. So there could be a situation where there is an individual in one of these properties, and it was for slight handicap. Okay. And what happens is that person's maybe got better, they've integrated into the community. And what that means is there is a space, there is a placement space in this house. So if, for example, the council said, look, we've actually got a guy with severe disabilities and mental handicap, we need to urgently place him, Ashurst will then do a quote for what they need done, and that will be reflected into the new care package. So Ashurst get a new care package for that specific client. The renovations will be done, and that is all at the cost of the operating company / the government, because it's part of the care package. So as an investor, you'll never ever be asked to fund any refurb, to make any repair, absolutely completely hands off, because it's all under the legal operational contract of the regulated operator. So that there could be, over the 25 years, maybe 4 or 5 different refurbishments in that property, which is care-led specific.
Great, thanks. Next question. In the examples given, are you looking for investors who can invest 150, for example, and about 260k for larger properties? Yes, the answer is yes to that. Do you have properties ready to go as rolling stock, as it does take time to source a property for option 2? The answer is yes. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, Barry, but we've got properties.
Yeah.
Any of these investment strategies, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, that would be ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Another question. In option 3, which is the private finance, would ARC accept loans in other currencies apart from pound sterling, such as USD or Japanese yen? Are you going to answer that one, Barry?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it would need to be in GBP, because it's all done through solicitors' legal team, and they would request it to be in GBP to the solicitor. So it would have to be in GBP.
Thank you. Okay. I appreciate we have run over time, but I think we've had some very good questions coming in, and I hope these have benefited those of you who are not asking the questions. I'll just give another minute just to see if there's any last-minute questions coming in. Whilst waiting for if another question comes in, let me just go back to my last slide here. I'd like to encourage as many of you to have a follow-up call with me or a meeting with me. These are my contact details. You can easily scan my QR code if that's easier. When we do these webinars, it's very much broad stroke sharing about the opportunity, educating about this asset class. But of course, each individual needs to tailor to what is right for them. And what I would like to encourage is that if this is something that sounds of interest to you, irrespective of which strategy at this point in time, I'd like to encourage that we could have either a Zoom call, or even better if you're in Singapore, a face-to-face meeting. And so I can better understand your investment goals and address any of your personalized questions. Okay. I think that's it. No more questions in the chat box. Lovely. Thank you very, very much. If you have any other friends, family who might be interested in this, please don't hesitate to let them know. We will, I believe, forward a recording to those people who have attended today, so you can even pass that on to your friends and family. But I'd like to thank you for taking time out again on your weekend to listen to Barry and myself. I hope it's been informative, and we look forward to building relationships up with you as we look to scale a business here that can have this profound positive impact on very vulnerable people. And we hope that you can be part of it as a good investment and a profound positive impact to these vulnerable people. So thank you very much once again, and we'll look forward to being in contact, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.